win for that period of this, but this will be fun.
All right, so it's Emirates Team New Zealand against Luna Rossa. 3.5 minutes to the start. Let's sit back and enjoy it with Tucker Thompson and Andrew Green.
Remember, the pre-start, the port boat enters at 2 minutes 10, the starboard boat at 2 minutes. They'll go into the pre-start box, and then there's 3 things they're trying to achieve. They're basically on a rolling start. They've got to hit the line going as fast as possible at the gun. Don't go across the line before it, otherwise you'll receive a penalty. So the first thing, get a great start. Ideally, you want to start ahead of your opposition. But in these 2 minutes, they actually get a chance to push a penalty on their opposition. They use the rules as best they can to actually get the umpires on the racecourse to decide that they've done something wrong. Port and starboard, windward, leeward. There are a few different rules that they'll use. That's the second thing. And the third thing is, where do they want to start on the racecourse? Do they want to start higher so that they get better wind, or do they want to start lower so they're first in at the first turning mark? That's the real dilemma. The better wind is if you're higher up on the racecourse, the closer it is to the bottom, the first turning mark, and the inside position that you'll get. And if you can jump over as the windward boat, you can steal the leeward boat's wind, and you will then be around ahead at that first turning mark. But if the boat to leeward underneath can keep their position, they get that first bear away at the first turning mark.
So here it is, folks, the pre-start. The port boat on the left. Italy is allowed to enter 10 seconds early, and there they go. That's so we don't get a collision early on in the race. Now it's Emirates Team New Zealand's turn from the right-hand side. They've entered the pre-start box, and Andy, we are officially underway in the pre-start of this two-boat match.
Hey, 1 minute and 42 seconds. Luna Rossa crossed comfortably. Luna Rossa are on port. Emirates Team New Zealand came in on starboard, and now they have jibed onto port, and they both disappear to this right-hand side, the safe zone in the pre-start area.
Important to note for everybody watching online or around the world or here live at America's Cup Park and Marina Green, this is the first official time we have ever seen 2 AC-72s on the race course.
Luna Rossa now tack onto starboard. Emirates Team New Zealand decide to take the position right underneath them. And Luna Rossa looked like they tried to just go underneath Emirates Team New Zealand. They decided they couldn't quite make that bear away. And now the two boats are basically flapping in the breeze at 56 knots. They're going head to wind.
You mean 5 or 6 knots? Right now, slowing down 56
yes.
seconds and counting, now down to 46. That was a big move that Dean Barker did, hitting the brakes and just effectively cutting off Chris Draper's Italian boat from getting to leeward of him. So by my eye, they want the leeward position.
Exactly right, Tucker. It looks like Emirates Team New Zealand want that leeward position, and this looks like a great start from them early on. Dean Barker swinging the wheel to left and right, and he looks like he's got the Italians trapped. He's got them right where he wants them. The Italians can't bear away, and the starting line is way to the left-hand side, so they've got to start accelerating towards the line. It looks good for Team New Zealand.
Yes, it does. And as Andy mentioned, both boats want to get a good start, but they don't have to be on the line at the gun. New Zealand is holding the Italians right now from getting into the start. Many, many lengths away from the line, and Dean Barker's in control. Now he puts the helm down. He's decided he's stuffed the Italians. They're slow enough. Now he's going to bear off. That was the gun. Well away from the line are both boats, but the race is officially underway, and New Zealand is ahead as we head for the line.
Good stuff. Well, Dean Barker showing really great match racing tactics there. He positioned his boat perfectly just underneath the Italians. The Italians had nowhere to go. They couldn't go up without tacking. They couldn't bear away because Emirates Team New Zealand were in the way. Look at that, streaking off the start line, 41.6 knots. Luna Rossa a little further behind because of that super tactical start. It doesn't matter what boat you're in. I don't care if it's a monohull, a multi-hull or whatever. If you do a good start, that is what happens. You end up ahead, and that's why Emirates Team New Zealand right there.
Massive speed from both boats, over 40 knots each as they head into mark number 1. The big question, will the lead boat, Emirates Team New Zealand, extend on starboard inshore or jibe onto port? Either way, they are ahead.
Looks like a safe bear away from Emirates Team New Zealand. No problem there. They start to go downwind. Both boats jumping up onto their foils as they accelerate I look to see for a jibe from Luna Rossa. That's what I'd expect to see. There's only a knot or so difference in the boat speed, so not a big gap appearing between the two of them. Emirates Team New Zealand look like they're going to go through a jibe. Here they go at 30 knots, pushing the bow around. They've got to try and stay on those foils. Luna Rossa then decide to continue towards the boundary.
Beautiful jibe for Emirates Team New Zealand, never coming off the foil there. They saw a couple crew members move into position on Luna Rossa and looked like they were getting ready to jibe, but clearly Dean Barker wanted the early advantage. He's on port first and well on their way downwind. Comfortably in control are the Kiwis at this point. And Andy, what are the options for Luna Rossa?
Well, Luna Rossa at the moment just have to keep their boat on their foils. They have to keep going as fast as they can. But at the moment, they have looks like they are following at the moment behind Emirates Team New Zealand. They feel like the offshore position is better. There's a little more current. And they're really tacking from one end of the boundary line to the other. And it looks like Emirates Team New Zealand got a really nice puff as they were able to put their bow around. Here go Luna Rossa. They're going to hit that puff as well. But Emirates Team New Zealand got the puff first, and that has allowed them to get a couple of boat lengths of extra distance between the two of them. The lead around 150 metres to Emirates Team New Zealand.
And here they go. The next move are the Kiwis jibing onto starboard. Not quite a foil-to-foil to jibe, but there they are right back up on the foils. And Andy, as you mentioned this morning, the difference between winning and losing can be coming off the foils on a jibe. They're going from 40 knots. They could slam the boat speed right down, lose 20, 25 knots in a jibe, while the other one stays on a foil. So the difference, the delta that we see right now between Italy and Emirates Team New Zealand can be wiped away literally in one jibe.
Yeah, very true. If you're slow off those foils on the jibe, that is very bad news. But it looks like everything is all in good shape, good order on board Emirates Team New Zealand, sailing very nicely down to these bottom two marks now. They are grinding on the windward hull. Luna Rossa coming downwind. They're on their foils, no problem there. Just a little bit more turbulence, it looks like, from that leeward foil on Luna Rossa. If that windward foil ever touches the water, Luna Rossa just get a big spray of water over the crew on that windward side as they grind in towards the bottom mark. Now they can choose either of these two marks, but we would expect both teams to head towards the Embarcadero, head inshore, because the current is sweeping into San Francisco Bay. There's about 2 knots less current as they come towards the shore, increasingly less the closer they get to the shore.
Both boats doing 35 plus knots of boat speed. It's tough to get a sense for just how tough it is out there and how much these crews are going through. We saw some spray earlier. It's like getting shot in the face with a fire hose. Oracle Team USA's Jimmy Spithill told us that they are sailing in hurricane force winds. If you think about the apparent wind being created by the boat and the wind speed, it's upwards of 60-mile-an-hour winds in their face. Certainly not easy sailing, not smooth sailing, as they say anyway.
Emirates Team New Zealand have jibed now onto port, so they look like they're coming down towards these bottom marks. We're just going to get a wide shot from the helicopter in 1 second, showing us those two leeward marks as we are just following Emirates Team New Zealand down. They're both going to round these marks, and it'll be interesting to see if they choose different marks or whether they try and head in off or inshore. Inshore's the key.
Look at the difference in angle between the New Zealand boat and the Italian boat. Much higher and slower. The Italians just trying to get their boat speed back up so they can foil. Meanwhile, it's New Zealand foiling into the leeward gates. They can choose one or the other. There they are now. The Italians just getting their boat going. So that was a bit of a loss there for the Italian team, and an advantage Team New Zealand as they head into the gates. And as Andy mentioned, they can choose the right or the left side depending on where they want to go upwind.
It looks like the simplest route here for Emirates Team New Zealand is to go around that right-hand mark. Look at the boat sliding sideways awesome. As they try and get around that mark. Left a half a boat length in between the two of them, but that gives you an idea of the leeway on these boats once they are slipping off the foils. And they slipped off the foils and just fell down onto the water, and that leeway is just a really good example of what they're generating as they go downwind. They're not on the foils as they go upwind. Luna Rossa choose the same mark. So maybe there's actually more wind is what they're really thinking about.
Well, the other thing it could be, Andy, is they're heading upwind towards Alcatraz. Two schools of thought here in an incoming tide in San Francisco. One is to head right on the first part of the beat here, the windward leg, to get there. It is underneath Alcatraz. There's a cone where you can get current relief. The other option is to sprint all the way into the city front side. But to go to the city front, you've got to go through a lot of adverse current first. So first choice for the Kiwis to get up under Alcatraz out of the adverse tide. But there is the course boundary, and they have to tack on to starboard. The next move belongs to the Italians.
So the Italians getting towards the boundary line. The green light will be flashing on the back of their boat. Then they'll go for attack. Here they go for attack. And they'll pull their sails on. I think what is interesting here is I wonder whether Luna Rossa are just staying close to the Kiwis just so that they can get a gauge of how fast they are in comparison to them for the next few races.
Well, 270 meters and counting separating the two teams. If you're a Kiwi fan, you are happy. Emirates Team New Zealand out in the lead.
So nice lead developed here by Emirates Team New Zealand. They got a bit of a right-hand shift as they got to the boundary line, and that has certainly helped them as they go tack back again onto port as they go upwind. Luna Rossa haven't really been able to find any kind of alternative route. The tactics on board difficult because the only thing they really could have done is go around the other bottom mark.
Well, it's interesting that we just talked about the incoming tide, and the Kiwis were heading inshore all the way to the city front, Andy, but they've tacked midway through this upwind leg and are now on port heading back to the right. So wonder what Ray Davies is thinking there. Clearly he's got an idea, a trick up his sleeve, and the Italians are following suit. "35 knots of boat speed downwind, 20 knots of boat speed upwind." This is a completely new America's Cup in every way, as the New Zealand boat heads towards Alcatraz again and tacks now on to starboard to head back into the middle of the track out in front of Luna Rossa. And there on the water, Andy, you can see the current ripples.
Light spot there for Emirates Team New Zealand, very light. Look how slow they're just going. For a second they're out of the tack. They are in less current, but they are now sailing back in towards more current. It was that little V of less current underneath Alcatraz that Emirates Team New Zealand was sailing for there, but it comes with a slight cost sometimes. The wind is a little shaky around the leeward side of that as Luna Rossa go towards that same position. Chris Draper turning the wheel. Then he leaves the wheel, runs up to the windward side where Francesco Bruni has got his hand steadying the wheel as Chris Draper runs across the trampoline, and they're safely onto starboard tack following Emirates Team New Zealand.
Well, having sailed out here a lot, I do know that they get a little bit of a right-hand bend in the breeze around that side of Alcatraz before heading into the worst part of the current, which Emirates Team New Zealand is in now. You can actually see their boat tracking from right to left subtly on the screen. That's the flood tide, just pushing them downwind. So now we're likely to see them head towards the city front.
I would expect so. This will be a long starboard board out towards the Embarcadero. There's both boats doing around 20 knots, 18 to 21 at the sort of ranges that we've seen upwind. The boats don't use their foils to try and lift the boat out of the water because that generates too much leeway. They want to pinch as close to the wind as they can while maintaining as best speed as possible. Emirates Team New Zealand, they're 18 knots sailing upwind against about 2 knots of adverse current coming in to San Francisco Bay.
Beautiful shots there. The city skyline in the background, the aquatic park and the Embarcadero. The SS Jeremiah O'Brien there just to leeward of Emirates Team New Zealand. Fantastic viewing vantage points here in San Francisco. And as we mentioned earlier this morning, the first time the America's Cup has ever been brought inshore to the fans.
Yeah, we're going to see them just a little later. They're going to do one lap around the racecourse, and then they'll come down here to America's Cup Park where the finishing line is. Emirates Team New Zealand tacking onto port. owning that left-hand side of the race course. You called it, Tucker. Slide underneath Alcatraz, tack, cross the worst of the current, get inshore as far as possible. And we'll see Luna Rossa trying to do the same thing, probably as they go towards the left-hand side, the lighter area of current, where it's shallower by the city front. Okay, it looks like Luna Rossa have actually decided that they've got to try something different, tacked in the middle of the race course. Interesting, I guess they got to do something, right?
Yeah, try and get a little bit out of phase with their opponent. New Zealand definitely owns the left, and the Kiwis are likely in less current than the Italians, so that was an interesting move. Francesco Bruni, one of the best in the business, he's calling the shots aboard the Italian boat. Ray Davies on board Emirates Team New Zealand has got this boat farther inshore to the left. Close to the boundary, though, so if they want a short tack or put a lot of smaller tacks into the shoreline there, they won't have that much room to do so. So it'll be curious whether New Zealand heads back out into the center of the course and whether the Italians stay in that position in stronger adverse current out there to leeward.
Well, Francesco Bruni, the tactician on the Luna Rossa boat, has decided that they didn't quite get the best of that start, so they've got to throw something else at the game. There we go, and they're doing exactly that. They're tacking again, Tucker, to try and get out of phase with the boat in front of them. You don't want to stay in the same bit of water or the same bit of wind as your boat that's beating you. You want to go and try and sniff out something new, something fresh, and that's the job of the tactician, is to try and get the boat positioned for the best wind shift or the best tidal advantage around the race course. The wing trimmer right in front of Francesco Bruni, Xavier Fernandez, a 49er crew. He's got a gold and a silver medal to his name, so this boat's stacked full of legends. He was in a 49er, one of the faster Olympic boats, the skiff, the 49er skiff, and he's trimming the wing. Looks to be doing a very nice job of it. No big dramas for Luna Rossa around the race course, and they didn't quite get the best of the start. How many times do we have to watch match races or the America's Cup to learn that it's all about the start? Still, in catamarans, they may foil, they may look beautiful and amazing, but if you don't get the start quite right, always going to go on the back foot from the beginning, and that's where Luna Rossa have been playing catch-up.
Both boats now heading to the left inshore out of the increasing flood tide here in San Francisco Bay. Emirates Team New Zealand keeping Luna Rossa in their zone of control, just behind and to leeward. And Ray Davies, the tactician, will now shift from offensive mode into defensive mode. He'll keep an eye as much behind on the Italians as he does forward on the wind shifts and the incoming tide. So we're likely to see New Zealand now react more to the Italians.
So Team New Zealand tacking. The process of tacking involves just pulling one of the boards up, putting the other board down. So you've always got to have your board on the leeward side, the side that's in the water, down in the water, and then you pull the windward board up. So we can see right there the windward board curved up on the windward side. A great viewing platform there on the Yacht Club's Peninsula and Marina Green. Super spot to see those boats come right in there. Emirates Team New Zealand going all the way to the boundary at Marina Green before tacking onto port. They go up to the top mark. We've got one more lap around and then down to the finish.
Yeah, great vantage point for the fans on shore on the peninsula there off of Golden Gate Yacht Club and Marina Green.
Beautiful, looks lovely. Look at that. Sunny day in San Francisco. We've got America's Cup boats racing.
Yeah, you know, I think everybody's a bit spoiled if you think about it. You know, people are going to watch this America's Cup and think, hey, that must be what it's always like. This is truly spectacular stuff from the inshore racing, the breezy venue that is San Francisco, the new wings on these catamarans, the foiling and flying above the water. This is not your father's or even your grandfather's America's Cup, that's for sure.
There we go, not foiling upwind, only foiling downwind at this stage. Who knows what the designers have got planned for the future, but all of that underneath the boat you can see is the structure that holds the master up. Well, it's the wing that's actually integrated with the mast, and that also is tension rods that keep the two hulls apart from each other and together at the same time, as it were.
I'm just curious why the Italians haven't tried to get out of phase with the Kiwis and get farther inshore. I know New Zealand would likely cover, but let's talk about Bruni's options as a tactician. The Italians are dragging the boat back into the middle of the course, dragging the game into the middle, perhaps to take care of advantage of some wind shifts. If you were on the Luna Rossa, Andy, as the tactician, what would you be thinking?
Well, I think it's very tricky because the boats lose a lot of time on the tacks upwind. When they're going downwind, the jibes, if you can keep foiling, they don't lose you much time at all. So you can actually be much more aggressive with how you go position yourself around the course downwind. But upwind, the tacks cost so much time that it is very difficult to do too many tacks around the race course. At Luna Rossa are trying to shake off the cover, the dirty wind from Emirates Team New Zealand that flows down onto them, and when you're the boat behind going upwind, that's what you want to try and avoid. And exactly what you were talking about, Tucker, the Italians have shaken off the cover from Emirates Team New Zealand and they're going in towards the waterfront.
You know, another tactical challenge that has been added to this new America's Cup, and you can see it there, the boundaries on either side. So no longer can we get a big split off to one side of the race course or the other. They have to keep tacking back into the middle, Andy, and it's a bit like a high-speed game of pool. If you want to set up, for example, in this case, for a ley line into the top mark, you've got to think a few moves ahead of that to decide where you're going to tack to get to that ley line and tack again here on starboard as the Kiwis are. So I wonder if some of these tacticians like Ray Davies and Bruni are playing pool to get used to these new boundaries.
Well, the right-hand side boundary, the ley line just there with Emirates Team New Zealand, who are now on starboard, coming to the top mark. They'll go downhill once more. We've got from the race course 16.7 knots of breeze average, 17.9 knots has been the peak. So nothing too untoward for San Francisco Bay as yet. The Kiwis looking control and happy.
So now the question, do they want the left-hand or the right-hand gate? And to my eye, it looks like Kiwi boat, left-hand pocket.
Yeah, that's right. Left-hand gate for the Kiwis because they don't want to do a tack. Their option might be to tack there and go around the mark at the bottom of the screen. Instead, they don't want to do a tack because it's costly in terms of time. They continue to this mark and then bear away, popping up onto the foils. Look at that, dipping the windward foil a little bit. The easiest of roundings, but it seems like all is safe. There they go again, jumping up like a like a whale out of the water.
Well, that's a new one. Like a whale out of the water.
Well, just breaching, I guess.
Yeah.
And then dancing on top more like a dolphin as they head downwind. Look at those foils, beautiful.
So from a whale to the dolphin, the Kiwi boat heading downwind. There's the delta, and most likely a view that Chris Draper at the helm does not want to see as they pass Emirates Team New Zealand, who jibes just behind them now. They're on the run. The Italians still heading upwind and have yet to get to the top marks. And Andy, the next tactical question for this boat, the Italians, is which mark will they turn around at the top gate?
Well, as you said, they've got to think a few moves ahead to be able to get that right-hand mark because they don't want to do tacks right when they get to the top. So I'd really like to see them take the right-hand mark and head offshore, but we will know more as they get towards the top mark. Emirates Team New Zealand steaming off downwind. They looked really good.
You know, Andy, you and I, having watched a lot of the AC45 America's Cup World Series races, have seen a lot of come-from-behind victories, even on this tight course with the boundaries. If one boat can get in a different piece of water, a different breeze than the other, perhaps an issue with the crew work or a bad shift, and the trailing boat can be right back in it.
For sure, as Luna Rossa tack onto starboard, they're coming to the top mark, but at this stage, it looks like Emirates Team New Zealand really are showing some pretty dominant skills right now. Sailed fast, neatly, tidy all the way around. Luna Rossa coming to this top mark. They've tacked once there right at the top. Didn't quite get that ley line right, but now they go for the bear away.
So Luna Rossa also choosing the left-hand gate, now finally popping up on the foils. Boat speed increasing by 25 to 30%. The difference in drag from when the hulls are in the water to out of the water now. Luna Rossa, there we go, 38 plus knots downwind as they chase the Kiwis. Andy, a lot of people had the Kiwis, Emirates Team New Zealand, favored going into this race, and obviously they're doing quite well. But one might remember that in the last AC45 match in the America's Cup World Series in Naples, it was Luna Rossa who beat the Kiwis in both the fleet racing and the match racing.
Yeah, and they had a pretty spectacular crash in one of those races as well, as Emirates Team New Zealand tried to squeeze around the top of them at one of the marks. Luna Rossa went straight into them, and this is great pictures of Emirates Team New Zealand looking very solid going downwind, 35 knots, a little puff there as they ease the wing out. Then we go to Luna Rossa, who are now just completed their jibe, and they're on port heading downwind. They look like they're in slightly less breeze. They haven't quite picked up as good a puff as the Kiwis have. Now they just jump up onto their foils.
Those red dots on the water give us a good indication of the New Zealand boat's track through the water, and we can compare that with that of Luna Rossa heading downwind. Well, there's a good view, Andy, of the delta, quite big. I mean, the Kiwis just keep gaining on every leg.
Sailing very nicely indeed, those Emirates Team New Zealand folks. Very nicely, particularly downwind, doing excellently as the Italians now jibe onto starboard for their final rush.
600 meters the delta when these two were at the leeward gates for the last time. Now well over 2,000 meters. Transamerica building in the background, the San Francisco skyline. Emirates Team New Zealand is just flying downwind, and it's quite a sight for sure if you are onshore.
Dear. Luna Rossa have copped a boundary penalty, so they just went into the boundary a little too close.
Well, talk us through what they're going to have to do now with that penalty, Andy.
So we can have a look at the lights. I don't know if we can quite see the lights, but the light came on there and they had to slow down. So that was a blue light. Certainly we had a graphic that says a boundary penalty. We'll just confirm that. Yeah, penalty was out of bounds, and now they're clear. I'm getting that officially off the chatter feed. Penalty is complete. We got 20 knots of breeze out on the racecourse. Emirates Team New Zealand doing very nicely indeed. Luna hitting a big puff right there going downwind. As they come towards the bottom marks, this is their final jibe into these two leeward marks. It's once more up and down and then to the finish.
Beautiful crew work aboard the New Zealand boat. The Kiwis seem to make no mistakes on this race course. Showing us how it's done now into the leeward gates for the second time. They'll round the left-hand side and head inshore. No longer the cone of Alcatraz. It's time to go towards the city front. And it looks like that's what they're doing now, Andy. But hang on, who's this down to leeward? Adam Bichel setting up possibly for attack, is he? Or what would you do if you were Ray Davies making the calls for the Kiwis?
Well, they seem to have a problem with their leeward board. Their leeward board is not going down properly. There is a problem on board the New Zealand boat, and I think that's what maybe they're sailing it with it a little higher on the upwind legs. But certainly something's going on there. Adam Bichel down on the leeward side trying to fix something up. We've got about 12 minutes upwind, about 6.5 to 7 minutes downwind, and then towards the finish as Emirates Team New Zealand tack onto port. Just have a look at those two boards again. Left-hand board is all the way up. The leeward board is
a little bit farther down. Is it on the right-hand side there, the starboard side?
Yeah, it certainly looks like it. Yeah, you can only see the logo of the Toyota on the right-hand side. So I just wonder if they had something wrong with that port side board.
Well, they rounded the left-hand gate. They did not go inshore to the left. Now on port, they're heading back to the middle of the racetrack. And here the two teams are going to meet. Emirates Team New Zealand on port under the rules. But the leeward boat are are the Kiwis, and actually the Italians would have to avoid. They are also on port as the windward boat. Potential collision here. Looks pretty close. Chris Draper kind of waffling back and forth there. Tough to tell the distance between the two teams as they converge.
Yeah, they had to duck them for sure right there, wasn't it? A few boat lengths certainly between them. No, I think they were okay. I
think Chris just wiggled the boat a little bit, slowed it down, and comfortable cross. The Italians would have had to give way under the rules there, and they did. Now, Luna Rossa sets up for the leeward gates.
Nice pictures. Look at that. The power, the grace of these two boats. Luna Rossa sailing beautifully. Look at that on the foils. Let's see if they can poke this through the jibe and stay on the foils. Looks like they're still on their foils. They might not be able to heat it up quite as much as they want to because they've got to get around that left-hand gate. Expect to see them just come off the foils and just soak a little downwind. They just jibed a fraction too late for that, perhaps. No, that's how it is. There they are around the bottom mark. The windward hull just lifts. You want to keep the windward hull out of the water. That reduces the amount of drag. The delta substantial, 2 minutes 47. Research and development going on all the time at the Luna Rossa base to bring them new foils, new wings, new elements to their boat that will help turbocharge it. These are the early races. We're going to see them get closer and tighter.
Yeah, historically, that is the case through the Louis Vuitton Cup. The teams get better as the game goes on, and maybe this would be a good time to mention that of the three teams, there's only one that is not competing in these early round-robin rounds of the Louis Vuitton Cup, and that is Artemis Racing.
Yep, Artemis Racing also busy in their shed, putting their boat together. They're a little step behind the Italians. But we're confidently told that they're going to be on the water in a couple of weeks, and we'll see some good racing. We can fill up the race schedule. We'll get Luna Rossa against Artemis, Team New Zealand against them too. Team New Zealand put on a real display, though. This is what they're so good at, a masterful display of sailing. They seem to have tamed the tiger of this AC-72, and they look to be in good control. The crew all hunkered down in their windward pod. The grinders kneeling, winding on the wing trim. So that'll be Glenn Ashby just calling for a bit more wing trim, and the grinders turn the handles, and that in turn pulls the wing to windward. Good stuff on Emirates Team New Zealand. Great pictures. Dean Barker driving the boat. He's at the back, sitting down. He looks comfortable, happy. And you can really tell something's about to happen as if Dean Barker stands up and has to give himself a firm grip, as he does right here. Running across the trampoline to the windward side, grabs the wheel. His team following close behind.
So Emirates Team New Zealand just keeping the Italian Luna Rossa team in their sights as we head back upwind for the second time. That's the Kiwi boat inshore, just off of the city front here in San Francisco. Dean Barker at the helm.
So we got wind speed average 17.4, 18.9 has hit the peak at 255. That was just 30 seconds ago, the wind data off the water.
This might be a good time to explain that, because there is a wind limit, Andy, and the race committee are taking wind readings all day long for a consistent any consistent 30-second period. The wind cannot average over 20 knots, or in this case with the tide built in, 22.1 knots. If it stays consistently over that for a 30-second time period, then the committee will take a look at whether there's too much wind to race.
That is exactly correct. That is pre-start. That is before the start. And then once they start, it's a moving 5-minute average. Right. So those are just the two differences. Before the start, exactly as you said, Tucker, 30-second average. And then afterwards, a 5-minute moving, what they call a boxcar average. But it looks like breeze is just about okay. And in fact, they can't once these boats get to the windward market, it doesn't matter how windy it gets, they can't call the race off in the last 2 legs.
At the final windward mark in downwind into the finish. And we have seen some spikes, a little bit over 22, but not enough, as Andy mentioned, for a consistent average for a 5-minute period. So the race is on. The Kiwis are ahead.
Well, we got a question here from Ian in Hamble, lovely place down on the south coast of England. He says, how is this helping Team New Zealand for the future? Well, it's a good question, because Emirates Team New Zealand, what they really want is they want all of these races to be as close as possible, to give them as much training for the big matchup for the America's Cup as possible if they should win the Louis Vuitton finals. And so Emirates Team New Zealand and Luna Rossa want the racing to be as tight and as close as possible as they go through. So we will see lots of developments on these boats over the next few weeks and months, getting towards the middle of August, which is really when it comes to crunch time, the semi-finals and finals of the Louis Vuitton Challenger Series. One of the only events left, sporting events left, that have a Challenger Series. Wimbledon, the famous tennis tournament that's just finished, was the same. Until 1922, it had a Challenger Series. The person who won the previous year wouldn't play tennis at all until the final. And that is what we've got here in the America's Cup. All the challengers get together and they race as hard as they can in preparation for meeting the defender. And the defender has a problem too, because they don't get to see how fast the challengers are, and they don't get to do any of that really hardcore racing before they have to go against the best that the challengers have to offer.
We are celebrating 30 years of that Challenger Series, sponsored by Louis Vuitton. They started in 1983, the Louis Vuitton Cup, and that is what these teams are trying to win in order to go on to the America's Cup.
Super view from the Marina Green and the Yacht Club Peninsula. Emirates Team New Zealand just nudging between 18, 19, 21, 22, getting towards the limit of the mark. That's a safety zone just the other side of there, and then the spectators, they won't get into that boundary zone. They don't want a penalty. We've got current heel angle also, you can see, going through the tack. Ideal angle around 5.5 to 6 degrees, because that keeps the windward hull and the windward board out of the water, reducing drag.
Well, there it is right there, between 5 or 6 degrees. Andy, you nailed it. Or Dean Barker nailed it, rather. I suppose he's doing a pretty good job out there on the race course. Here's a look at the new wings of this America's Cup. And Andy, tell us about how these different flaps work on the wings.
So essentially, the simplest way to describe it's like if you look out of an aeroplane window, you see a wing going across. That's just stood up, and it has 2 parts. It has the front element, which is largely solid. It does rotate a bit, but the second element is essentially the flaps. So when you pull, you can actually change the angle that attacks the wind, and it gives you a really nice way of generating as much speed forwards and lift as possible. And so those 2 elements articulate to give the perfect angle to the wind, whether they want to sail high or fast. And the wing trimmer, Glenn Ashby, he's in control of that, but he's always talking to Dean Barker, the helmsman, about how much power is in the boat and how much the exact angle of those 2 elements of the wing fall. But very similar to an aeroplane wing, where you have the front solid section and the flaps at the back, adjusting the speed as you go through the tacks and jibes and sail upwind and down.
So the rich get richer, as they say. The lead boat gets to get the wind shifts first. And that's why we saw a little bit of difference in speed, as Dean Barker can comfortably choose where he wants to sail on this race course. Top of the track probably has a little bit more puffs, a little bit more breeze up there, Andy, as the Kiwis approach the top mark.
There we can see that windward hull just out of the water. That's probably, well, now they're looking at 7 or 8 degrees of angle, but just above the water is about 5 or 6 degrees. As they prep for the tack, they push the board in on the what was the windward side, and then the board on the other side comes up. They try and have as little board in as possible just during the tack. Now the leeward board is down and they're on their final approach. This is the last windward mark. It's a mad dash down towards the bottom gate and then a reach towards the finishing line, where everyone here at America's Cup Park will be here to cheer the winners of our first two-boat race.
Emirates Team New Zealand showing us how it's done today. At the top mark here, taking the left-hand gate, the gate that they have chosen all day to head back inshore. There they go, up on the foils again.
Nice.
Look at that.
Nice. Look at that. Good stuff. The water that's been coming off those foils, that's just gives you an idea of some of the physics that's involved underneath the water on those wings. The wings are pushing down on the water. They're generating high pressure underneath the wings, lower pressure just above, and that's what pushes the boat up and out of the water. And they have to take a lot of weight of that boat on those wings.
It's a lot like a water ski. If you think about getting a start in water skiing, first you're dragging through the water. That is slow, but once you generate enough speed and power, you can fly skimming above the water, and that's effectively how the foils work on the sailboat here. As they fly downwind, the forward trimmer's getting ready in position for the jibe. Andy, we've got the boards being switched. He keeps it, yeah, keeps it on a foil. Look at that.
Lovely.
Dean Barker, beautiful jibe.
Look at that. That was beautiful. We'll get the data a little later to tell you exactly how fast they went through that jibe, but they do just keep the boards down fractionally during the jibe, both of them, just to make sure that if the boat comes back into the water on the windward side, they've still got a foil in the water. Anyway, they're all good now. As Luna Rossa come up towards the windward mark, Emirates Team New Zealand back down towards the finish.
You know, it's a bit deceiving to see which boat is going upwind and downwind, because also new to this America's Cup, this class development, is the fact that we don't have spinnakers anymore, or even large reaching gennikers. The boats are sailing downwind with the jibs in the same way they're sailing upwind, Andy, and why is that?
Well, that's just because the apparent wind is so far forwards. If you imagine parking your car, winding down the window, and before you head off, the wind is coming from whichever direction around you. But the faster you press on the accelerator, the more the wind comes directly forwards from you. And if you're going at 40 knots, 50 miles an hour, the wind is straight in your face, and that's effectively what's happening here. The wing is so efficient that it generates speed forwards and brings the wind from behind you to pretty much in front of you. And the key to doing these foiling jibes is keeping that wind, is actually almost tacking downwind. But yes, you've got to keep your eyes and ears out, folks, because it's harder to tell when the boats are going downwind. But one of the clues is right here. Emirates Team New Zealand, they are going downwind, and you can tell they're going downwind because they are flying on those foils.
Very cool.
Alcatraz in the background, very cool. Watching that foiling jibe from afar as the boat just steams through. Didn't come off the foils for an instant there. Beautiful.
You and I were out on the track a few days ago, Andy, in a rib, chasing these boats around, and it really is a surreal experience when you see them accelerate the way they are, and then they lift straight up out of the water, and it's almost confusing to watch if you don't expect it, if you are seeing it for the first time, when they increase speed and then they just lift straight up. And then, of course, that increases their speed even more, upwards of 25-30%.
Yeah, just a close-up of the crew there. Glenn Ashby sitting down, trimming the wing. Very close contact with Dean Barker. They've all got headsets in their helmets. Two chaps moving there. Looks like they're about to jibe. Yeah, windward board comes down. Here we go from behind. We can see this jibe as they poke it through. And Dean Barker just stays on that wheel, steers it through, and then pushes it up as they go through the jibe. He's happy that it's safe. He's able to go to the windward side. Looks like they're slowing down just a little, but
keeping it on the foil right through the jibe. But, you know, one team that you can be sure will be watching that is Oracle Team USA, the Defender. Foil to foil jibes are the key in this new America's Cup, and that was, well, as good as it gets. New Zealand now the benchmark.
Yeah, Look at that, beautiful. They're in plenty of breeze right there, and also quite a lot of favourable current. You can see the current line just on the side of Alcatraz for future races. That's a key area to look at the change in current, and maybe going into a little less current because that is under the shadow of Alcatraz as they go past some of the super yachts, Adela, Imagine, all flanking the race course. The Kiwis come down towards the bottom mark. This is their final mark, and it looks like it is only going to be about 7 minutes, these downwind legs. And Emirates Team New Zealand are doing 38 knots. Let's see how they go through this jibe.
Blink and you miss it.
Blink and you'll miss it, yeah.
So if they nail this ley line or course into the mark correctly, this will be the final jibe on the final run for Emirates Team New Zealand. Out in the lead to their left, mark number 6, the last turning mark in the race. The next stop is the finish line.
Well, we've got a huge crowd here at the America's Cup Park. Everyone railing it on the side of the waterfront to get the best view as Emirates Team New Zealand are now starting to make their final approach to the finishing line. We can see them getting larger and larger, jumping up on those foils. Look at that, super fast. The windward hull is out of the water. There's a couple of waves there that they're just coming through. Spectator boats and hospitality boats crowding up towards the finish to see Emirates Team New Zealand in their first race against another boat here in this Louis Vuitton Cup series, and they have shown a very clean pair of heels. Very nice sailing, 35 knots, solid as a rock.
There's a great shot of the America's Cup Park in the upper right-hand part of the screen there, pretty much in the center. That is the finish line. And Andy, we are here, and all eyes have been on the screen until now. There's a mass exodus. Everybody is leaving the screen and heading to our right to the end of the pier here so they can see for their very eyes Emirates Team New Zealand, and we can just see them too poking around the edge of the America's Cup Park and heading towards the finish line. The crowds are going wild. What a view. Everybody is going to get here. They're literally running to the edge, Andy, as Emirates Team New Zealand comes across the finish in this first two-boat match.
Here they go, popping it up on the foils just for the last little bit here. 30 knots coming in towards the finishing line. The checkered line on the water between those two marks as they are 3 boat lengths away. 2 boat lengths as they bear away down, pushing the hull up. A little less breeze, crossing the line. Emirates Team New Zealand take the win.
Oh, the crowd's going wild here at the end of America's Cup Park. What a view. What a race. And if you're a Kiwi fan, I'm sure you are proud of that team right there in front of us. Emirates Team New Zealand draws first blood over Luna Rossa.
Good stuff.
Well, Andy, I think all of us have a collective sigh around here in San Francisco and around the world. The first two-boat match, we've all been waiting for it. And there's plenty more to come, folks. A lot more matches between these two teams. Then Artemis will be on the race course. We'll have all 3 of them in a few weeks' time. And now Emirates Team New Zealand has just tacked towards the fans to give them a flyby. We're likely to see a wave.
Wave your hands in the air, folks. Great stuff. That's it.
Fantastic stuff. You know, in America's Cup's past, you'd have to be out on a yacht to get to see pictures as close as this. But here are the fans right inshore, and they can hear the guys. Look at them waving. They can hear you on the boat. As Emirates Team New Zealand does a flyby now.
Luna Rossa coming down towards the finishing line. They are coming on their foils, no problem at all. Silver and red. They're going to do another 2 jibes, I think, down in towards those 2 lured marks.
Nice job, Rich
nice.
Draper, keeping it on the foils.
Yeah, very nice
That's
jibe there. Yeah, and a big puff as they come out of the jibe as well. That was all hands to the pumps, lads. Look at that acceleration, amazing as Luna Rossa come towards these 2 bottom marks. The breeze is building all the time here. What have we got the latest from on the race course? 19.7 knots peak. Plenty of breeze right there as
39 knots at boat speed, 38.9.
Yeah, they're not hanging around there.
There we go. Over 39 knots, the crew heading downwind. As Andy mentioned, 1 more jibe to the finish for Luna Rossa, and we can see them live as well off of America's Cup Park. The finish line literally just a couple hundred feet away from us in perfect vision in front of the fans.
Yep, and it's free all around America's Cup Park. The early stages as Luna Rossa now coming down. They need to jibe towards that bottom mark, Tucker.
You know, they got to get this right. Now, they are still racing for the ability to complete this race, and here's why. The time difference under the rules has to be less than 5 minutes, the delta between the first boat and the second. Now, there was just a little bit over 4 minutes at the top mark, Andy. They've got to finish this race. There it is. Oh, man, 4 minutes, 36 seconds and counting. Well, that could put a depressing end to what was an exciting two-boat race if they don't actually are allowed to finish. Here's the difference here coming into the mark, Andy, and it's definitely going to be over 5 minutes.
It's going to be close. Anyway, I'm not sure it has a great deal to do with much because
they tiebreakers later on.
They won't make a point, and in the end we're going to have a semi-final and final, so I think it's all going to be okay. Not going to get too worried about that as Luna Rossa now head up for the final reach towards the finishing line. Nice look at that as Giles Scott there runs sure-footed as a mountain goat across the structures and over the trampoline.
Still putting on a great show for us and the fans out here in front of America's Cup Park. Now, what is that, 3 minutes? Not sure what the last graphic was, Andy. Now we're being told 4 minutes.
That is the time since Emirates Team New Zealand have finished. Well, we're just going to enjoy the fact that Luna Rossa are out on the race course with Emirates Team New Zealand. We've had two of them racing, and I know we've got a big crowd here who will give them a decent cheer at this finish as they come towards the finishing line. It is Luna Rossa and their crew. It is Chris Draper from the helm, Francesco Bruni on tactics, Xavier Fernandez trimming the wing, Lele on the wing grind, a freestyler Marco Montis as they come down towards the finishing line.
So we've just been informed that the 5 minute difference is right there. They've got 15 seconds to get across the line under the rules to have completed the match, which may or may not come into play later on. Tight, very close. Talk about it.
5 minutes goes there as Luna Rossa now come down towards the finishing line. 25 knots as they come towards that finish here at America's Cup Park. Good stuff. Glad that we've got this two-boat race done here in the early rounds of the Louis Vuitton Cup.
So it was over 5 minutes, but still a spectacular performance as the first time we had two boats on the race course. And give the Italians a big cheer, folks. You can see them right here off of America's Cup Park. They've done it, just crossing the line now. Good form, and as Andy mentioned, a lot more racing to come here in the Louis Vuitton Cup between these two teams and eventually Artemis Racing. So Emirates Team New Zealand taking the win, and Luna Rossa, though, putting on a good show for us as well, just off the finish line here at America's Cup Park. And we've got some Italian fans in the audience.
Super stuff. Well, the tale of the turf, really, Tucker, was what we go back to time and again in match racing. You have to win the start, and we saw 2 minutes of pre-start action, and it was the turn up for the final approach to the line that really did it for the Italian team. Emirates Team New Zealand just tacked to leeward of them. They forced the Italians to stay up, and Emirates Team New Zealand then could choose exactly when they bore away and went for their acceleration for the starting line, and that meant right from the off the Italians were at least 10 seconds or so behind Emirates Team New Zealand, and the Kiwis went around the racecourse looking solid as they have done for two previous races that we've seen them race on their own, and this time they raced against the Italians. We didn't see too much ding-dong at the beginning, but we saw Emirates Team New Zealand sail very nicely around the racecourse. The Italians didn't quite have enough. The first round or so, they looked like they were keeping it nice and tight, but subsequent to that, Team New Zealand got in different breeze and extended all the way around the racecourse to a very healthy delta margin of just over 5 minutes.
Well, our commentators there were Tucker Thompson and Andy Green back here in the studio.